So, hello, good morning, and welcome to this session at Optimony. We are very happy to have you all in this session. I am Nidhi, and I'm going to represent most of the taxpayers today and to check with the experts what are their tax queries and what could be a possible solution. The objective and the intent of the session is to help as many as FCCs in planning their taxation. In my last 20 years of tax practice, I have never seen so much of confusion around tax laws. And there has been series of announcements by the government. The due dates have been changed n number of times. So this session would be helpful to all of us to wrap up what are the new announcements by the government, how tax planning is still possible, and with the government's new objective of being more stringent with the tax laws, let's once again evaluate is there anything which needs to be changed as far as your all tax compliances are concerned. I'm going to represent all of you. We have received several questions from the participants in course of registrations and later on. While the session is live, we will ask many of these questions to the experts who are there with us. Otherwise, if you have any specific questions, please put it up in the chat box. We'll try to take up all of them, towards the end of the session. We have reserved some 20 minutes of time for an open Q&A session so that it becomes helpful to all of us and we are able to clarify and resolve many of our tax queries. I'll briefly introduce the speakers that we have for today. We have Akash Bansal with us. He is a co-founder at Optimony. Akash is a Six Sigma specialist and he is an expert in taxation matters. He believes that the process and the documentation for any activity needs to be accurate, and this is how, while he is representing the tax authorities, he has 100% success to his credit. We have Sujit Jaiswal with us. Again, Sujit is a very learned chartered accountant, more than 15 years of experience. He has worked with large number of individual and corporates during his thing. He has worked at various corporates over the last 10 years. He will resolve many of the queries that you have, maybe an insight into how various matters are handled at the litigation stage. So over to you, Akash. I'll keep asking questions what we have received from the participants and let's try to resolve while we are there in the right stream. So let's get going. Yeah. A warm welcome once again to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nidhi, for your kind words. I will start the slides first. So basically, we're starting with like what is the importance of tax planning. It's something which helps us, all of us, to optimize the tax outflow within the realms of the legality, which means in compliance with the law. What all we can do to maximize the benefit and reduce the tax to a lowest level, which in turn it helps us to increase the cash flow. And in every situation, everybody has to kind of evaluate what works best for them, depending on the goals and aspiration. What are the benefits they can avail, or which one they have to kind of like. And most importantly, is that it has to be.
Sujit, sorry to interrupt. Sujit, sorry to interrupt. I think there is some voice breaking in between. So.
Yeah, is it better? Like I'm going directly on.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it's basically tax planning. I'll just restart. Basically, tax planning helps us to optimize the tax outflow, working within the realm of the compliance of law. So whatever which is being deductions, allowance, exemption, which is defined in the act, and once we will strive to maximize those exemptions and allowance which is allowed as per law in order to reduce the tax outflow, which it helps in terms to increase the cash flow for an individual, because lower tax, which in terms help to increase in the cash flow. And everybody has to kind of evaluate what are the exemptions, allowance, which one can avail, and what are some of the things which will not come under within the goal and aspiration, and they can leave those things. So moving on to the next slide. Basically, as you know,
1 minute. Many of our participants had asked whether tax planning is legitimate in law. So if the government comes to know whether we are doing a tax planning, is there any penalties which are possible to be imposed?
Yeah, tax planning is something very different from tax evasion. Tax planning is something which we do basis compliance with law. So whatever the exemption allowance which is legally permissible, and one who kind of avail those allowance in order to reduce tax flow will come. While as tax evasion is something which is not legally allowed. Just like if somebody is giving bogus investment or trying to deflate revenue, or increase their expenditure in order to reduce the tax flow, that will come under tax evasion. So it's not compliance with law, and it could involve later on a lot of penalty or go tax or go later on. So one should be very careful whether they are opting for tax evasion or one who is going for the tax planning. So it's quite important that we kind of follow rigorously the law which is there, so that later on there is no pungency or adverse impact on our tax. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much.
Moving on to the new for the current financial year, we have something called new regime and old regime. So what is the old regime? Basically, old regime is the current tax structure which is there, and new regime wherein the government has allowed some kind of reduced tax rate at the cost of foregoing some of the exemption which is there. Uh, so for the current year, we have to understand this old regime and new regime. So basically, old regime, what it does is that it helps you kind of invest in some of the tax saving tools, and in order to allow get the deduction and exemption. While new tax regime is very helpful for somebody who is not kind of doing any kind of investment, and it ensures higher cash flows, and it's a very simple structure, and the government basically has launched this in order to reduce litigation and an entire system of tax calculation on a very defined thing, or at a very simple level. So let's discuss nitty-gritties of both this old and new regime. Moving on to the old regime or the normal current tax structure which is there, where if you see the tax slab up to 2.5 lakh, the tax is nil. From 5 to 2.5 to 5 lakh, it's 5%, and 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs of income, you have to pay 20%, and above 10 lakh is 30%. So it's on a progressive rate, which essentially means that as you go up
One minute, sorry to interrupt. Some of our participants are not able to hear you clearly. Can you just come a little close to the system, because it's very important that we understand it in the right spirit. So the voice is little breaking in between. Yeah. So 1 minute. I think we'll just take a small break and
yeah,
yes.
is it okay better?
Yes. So Sujit, before we start with this, can someone opt for a different slab in middle of the year? Like they have chosen option one in the beginning of the year. Middle of the year, can they move out of the scheme one and get into a new scheme?
Yeah, what happened is that once they inform employer about the new or old regime at the start of the financial year, and during the financial year they don't have an option to switch from old to new or new to old. But at the end of the year, when they're filing the return, they can always switch on to another regime which is there. But there could be challenges which might one face, and one needs to be very careful. For example, if somebody has opted for a new regime, his form 60 will not contain all the breakups like HRA exemptions and other deduction which is opted for, say section 80C and so on. So later on, in case you want to file return with under old regime, there are certain things which employer has to mention in this form 16, so that he benefit can be availed, like LTA, medical reimbursement and so on. So it's quite helpful that one may opt for an old regime, which is the default also. In case somebody is not informed their employer, the old regime will be taken as a default option in that case. So during the middle of the year, it will not be possible to switch. And moving on to this old regime, the tax structure is like, as I mentioned, this is the slab rate which is there. And if you go to the next new regime, the tax rate is much lower than that. So the first column is the normal, which is the old regime, and the second concessional column is for new regime. So if you see the tax rate up to 5 lakh, it's 5% for both, and from 5 to 7.5 lakh, the tax rate is 10% in the new regime, while it's 20% in the old. Similarly, from 7.5 lakhs to 10 lakhs, it's 15% in a new regime, while it's 20% on a old regime. Similarly, for 10 to 12 lakhs, 20% in the new, and 12.5 to 15 lakhs, 25%. Beyond 15 lakhs, it's same. So especially at the lower level or till the midpoint, they have given a reduced rate of lower rate in case of a new regime. So what are the some of the disadvantage or allowance which will not be allowed in case of a new regime? If you move to the next slide, so basically first will be the standard deduction, your profession tax on employment, LTA, your house rent allowance, and similarly, all the deduction under 80C, which is 1.5 lakh, people can get by filing their LIC, Provident Fund, tax saving mutual fund, and so on, will not be allowed. Similarly, in case they have a housing loan, uh, the interest on housing loan under Section 24B will not be allowed in that case. So these are the major, one in case of a salary, these are the all exemption one has to forego in case they are opting for a new regime. So I put for an example also, just to make understand like how this old and new regime works. So in case of a employee who has not invested anything, and say for example, employer deducts a 50,000 of provident fund, and standard deduction is 50,000, which automatically kind of given by the employer in the form system without any consent and all. Say in this example, one has a salary of 15 lakh in both the cases, and in the old regime, he will be allowed 50,000 deduction, and under 80C, this PF deduction, which is there by 50,000. So net on a total level, 1 lakh additional uh, exemption which will be there. So net income will be 14 lakh, and the tax outgo will be 2,41,000. Similarly, if we go in the new regime, this 50,000 standard deduction is not allowed. Similarly, all these 80C deduction like your PF, LIC, etc., will not be allowed. So your income will remain at 15 lakh, and the tax will be at a lower rate, but the tax will be at a lower rate, which will come to 1,95,000. So somebody will be beneficial in case there is not a major investment has done in 80C, HRA, housing loan and all. Says for somebody who has automatically or already have a LIC policy, or already they have a other kind of provident fund being deducted, they can opt for the old regime only. So in the second example, I've tried to plot that. For example, somebody who is in living in a rented premises, and say hypothetically they are paying 2,40,000. Similarly, life insurance 50,000, which is already there. They have a tuition fee which is already running, say 50,000. NPS contribution and mediclaim amount which they are providing.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just switch off your video? I think then the voice will become more stable. The country is amazing. All of us need to understand what is the difference between, yes.
Yeah. So is it better?
I think if you turn off the video,
Hello?
it will become much better.
Right. So it means that as far as allowances are concerned, there is no difference between the old regime and the new regime. But with respect to our other standard deductions and ATC, there is a difference. We will not be able to claim the same in the new regime, right? That's what.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So in the new regime,
right.
none of these allowances which you have mentioned will not be allowed, but the tax rate is lower.
So
For
that's
somebody
quite
who,
beneficial. I mean, then all the salaried people have to make sure that they give the right.
yes, they have to give the declaration, And I've tried to also exemplify in this case, in case somebody has a already running LIC, tuition fee, NPS contribution, Mediclaim. So in that case, I've tried to plot that, and I've calculated in the old regime, considering all this claim which is under 80C, 1.5 lakh Mediclaim, NPS. So after standard deduction of 50,000 and all this chapter 6 a deduction of 2 lakhs, net income is 11 lakhs, and the tax outflow is 1,48,200. While in the old regime it's 1,95,000. So already somebody who is already paying or making investment in all those deduction and exemption, it will always be preferable, or lower rate will be, a lower tax outflow will be there in case of old regime. So, but new regime is good for somebody who's a starter, may not have much investment in all this LIC and tuition fee, Mediclaim, and so on. For them, it could be a simpler and lower tax outflow would be there.
Right. So it's a blessing in disguise for people who have not submitted the declaration to the company. Can we say like this?
Yeah, true.
Right. So they'll be able to, by default, continue in the old regime. While for freshers who are just starting with their professional career, maybe the regime is more helpful. They don't have to take care of any of these investments,
Yeah.
and straight away they get a lower tax liability.
True.
I think
True.
government has been very fast.
And also the payout pay in their hand salary which much more, because they will not have to kind of invest. So initially, somebody who's starting a career already will have a much lower salary. So in that case, it works as you said, right? You said it will be blessing in disguise.
Yes. Right, but they need to remember that they have to give a declaration to the company that they want to come in the new regime. Otherwise, they will lose the benefit. By default, they'll continue to be in the old regime, right?
Exactly. As I said, by default, employer will choose old regime, and they always, most of the employer gives an option in start of the year to choose which regime you're going to opt for, and you have to voluntarily come forward and kind of apply with that.
Right. Also, Sajid, one issue which comes up during tax return filing, many people forget to give their tax rent receipts to the company and some of those allowances for which they should get the exemption. Can they claim all these exemptions when they are filing the return?
Yeah, so it's allowed except few things which has to come compulsory from the employer, like LTA, medical reimbursement. While other thing like 80C, which is your 1.5 lakh deduction, or HRA, as you told, can be claimed while filing the return. That is possible, but it is always advisable at least HRA part, LTA part should come through the employer. That is more, why is so? Because employer do a first kind of check, and once it's reflected in the form 16, it is added a lot of got credibility in that thing. Otherwise, there could be some queries, if there is undue claim which is happened afterward. But law allows later on to take HRA benefit, 80C deduction, etc., which has not been filed with the employer. But when we have not filed with the employer, tax deducted may be at a higher level, which they ultimately have to claim as a return refund once they file their return of income.
Right. True.
Yeah, so I'm moving to the next slide. Basically, 80G, it's a basically because, as you know, in this current crisis, government has come with PM Care Fund. So a lot of people have donated into that. So they would have a query like, what is kind of deduction which will be allowed? So there is a deduction which is allowed under section 80G, wherein if you make a donation to a particular fund or to any political party, or even this PM Care Fund which is currently going, we will be allowed deduction. So what is the amount of deduction? So it will be 100% to the PM Care Fund, and especially to other national relief fund or national level fund which is there, like PM Care Fund, disaster recovery, or defense fund, all those things are allowed at 100% of the amount, which essentially means if you have invested 10,000, this entire 10,000 will be allowed as deduction, but there is restriction of 10% on your gross total income, so that that 10,000 should not exceed 10% of your GTI. So this is what is there, and the payment has to be made through a banking channel or through digital only. And from the current year, the government has come up with
So
something
here,
called.
Sujit, we have got a question. One of the participants has asked.
Yes, yes. Can you repeat again? Actually, I couldn't hear you.
So somebody, yes, so someone has given some 15,000 rupees cash as donation for some, distribution of vegetables somewhere. So they have a query whether they can claim ATG on this kind of payments that they have made during this pandemic period.
I'm afraid it will not be considered from donation allowance point of view, because this section, categorically talks about, in case you want to do a cash donation, which is more than 2,000, the same will be disallowed. So I'm afraid any amount of beyond 2,000 rupees in cash will not be allowed. It has to be through a digital or through banking channel only.
Right. So even when we are doing charity, we need to be systematic. It has to be by way of a check payment.
True, true. And obtaining the
And
receipt
that
from
was
the.
specifically for various institutions, not even.
True, true.
Right.
You also have to understand, recently also there are a lot of, what you call it, fake sites and SMS comes where you make the money and you'll not get the benefit. So in order to avail this benefit, pay through a banking channel, and get a receipt for amount which you have paid, which kinds of, substantiate that. And just to add one more point, which because there is some changes, this has happened from the current financial year. So from 1st October 2020, whenever you are making a any donation to a donee, the donee has to file a statement of donation, and it will reflect as your tax statement. That amount, whatever is getting reflected on the statement of donation, will be only allowed post 1st October 2020. So anybody who's making any kind of donation post this period have to ensure that donee kind of filed a return which contains your donation and details of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Sujit, I have one doubt. What kind of return donee files and with whom, and how it impacts the donor at the end of the day?
Yeah. So whenever donor makes a payment, he will get receipt. Similarly, post this, they will have a filing option in the income tax portal, wherein they have to upload details of the donor along with the PAN number, amount of donation, and so on, so that this amount will get reflected in the return of the donor, similar to your what you call it, TDS and thing like that. So government is adding an extra step so that there is not something which gets kind of evaporate in between. I mean, that way.
So there will be a backend like cross match between the details given by the donor and the donee.
Exactly.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Moving on to compliance for HNI. When I'm talking about HNI, it's somebody who is who's having a net total income exceeding 50 lakhs. They will have an extra surcharge which is applicable. So somebody who is earning more than 50 lakh has to pay a surcharge of 10% from income between 50 lakhs to 1 crore. Beyond that, 15% and so on. So slab is defined in case somebody is earning income. There is additional disclosure requirement in the return of income, wherein they have to submit the statement of asset and liability in their return, and this entire amount has to be valuation at a cost. So all this amount should be stated at cost, and in case of immovable property, they has to mention the location of asset, cost, price, address, and so on. Similarly, in case of movable asset, they have to give detail of jewelry, bullion, vehicle, any kind of financial asset, just like cash and bank balance, insurance policy, any kind of loans and advances. Similarly, in case they have to obtain any loan against these assets, they can mention those loans or liability in there. So net amount will be shown as their net worth, which will be reflected in the income tax return. So this is I'm just reiterating this is applicable only in case somebody has a net income beyond 50 lakhs. So moving to the next slide, something, at times it is seen that, people are kind of, submitting claims which is not correct, like rental receipt, proof of investment, and there is a caveat, or there is a, penal consequence for this act, which might run into, 1x or 3x of the amount they want to evade, and there will be further consequence of interest penalty under section 23A, B, and C, which is basically, in case they have not paid advance tax, they have done the deferment of advance tax in particular quarter, and so on. So this will be the additional liability which might come up, and it's very important to note for all the SSEs that whenever they are filing the return, they should make sure whatever income is getting reflected in Form 26AS, that should be filed in their return of income. This is very critical. Otherwise there could be later on some query
And
from
so
the
how will
yes, Nidhi, please tell me. Hello, I think it's getting hanged. Yeah. I think Nidhi's video is hanged. It looks. Akash.
right? So I'm saying here, yes, Sujit, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Just it's little there. There's still, there's some lack of clarity in the voice.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me.
So somebody was asking how will income tax come to know that the LIC receipt that I have is fake or genuine? Do they go and check with the LIC authorities that whether the payment is genuine or not? How the income tax substantiates that this investment is genuine?
So there is a possibility of getting cross-checked with the department, because at the end of the day, the tax authority have all the power to confirm the balance, to confirm the amount of investment with the department, and especially when the matter is taken up for assessment and scrutiny. So at the first level, mostly this information is asked by the department. Later on, in case they have any kind of doubt and other thing, they can always go back and check this. Yeah. In order to avoid all those things, it's very critical that one should be very, very careful at the time of filing return itself. Yeah.
Right. So we have a very interesting question. Can we take it up in between? I think it's a very, very important and a relevant question today. What if an employee leaves in between and he has to return a portion of her income back to the company? It is something like a clawback clause which was there in the agreement, right, Anurag? I think this is the question. Like we had in the case of Mrs. Chanda Kochar, that she had to return a part of the income which she has earned from ICICI Bank to the company. And then what happens? Do we need a proof for that? Is the question here.
So what I understand is that if a salary is paid to somebody, say for example 6 months thereafter, once he's leaving the organization, there is something called notice paid deduction and other, which is kind of levied on the employee, or he has not served the notice period. An amount gets deducted from his salary. Whether with the reduced salary, his total salary outflow will be at a lower rate, and TDS deducted will be higher. So, is it any way to get this TDS amount refunded? Is that the question which one want to ask?
Right. Can you please, Anurag, this is a very important and a pertinent question. Maybe he can raise that. There are two aspects to the query. One is the clawback clause, and second is whether the excess TDS for the same financial year. Both gets applicable here. So here, according to my experience, this has to be claimed as a refund from the government itself. There is no relief which an employer can pass on, because once the tax gets deducted, the employer will pay the amount to the government, and subsequently the same has to be recovered directly by an employee.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Right.
So
Thank you so
that is,
much. Yes,
yeah.
please go ahead.
Next is it's a especially in case somebody is paying a rent to an individual which is in excess of 50,000 of rent per month. It is also important that they deduct TDS on this payment, and the amount which has to be deducted is 5%. But since from 14th May, the finance ministry has come with a notification where 25% of the TDS amount gets waived off or getting reduced. So amount will be 3.75% from 14th May onwards. And there is no specific provision to obtain TAN number for filing this TDS return, which gets deducted. He can use his PAN number, and in order to deduct that. So this gets applicable for an individual and HUF. Yeah. So from next slide onward, I will request my fellow colleague Akash to take up these slides hence from this.
Thank you, Sujit. So, hello everyone. Good morning, and I am Akash Bansal. So, I'm going to talk about the TDS compliances when you buy property from the NRI. So, Income Tax Department has created certain provisions when a person in India buy the property. So, you can buy property from a resident Indian or a non-resident Indian. So, in both the cases, Income Tax Act talk about deduction of certain amount of portion from the sales consideration and pay to the seller, and the deducted amount has to be deposited with the government. So there are two very important things here which I wanted to bring in notice for everyone, because we are dealing with such cases every month, and the buyer, since he is innocent and he doesn't know that there are compliances which he has to follow when he buys the property from NRI or a resident Indian, and he do not fulfill those compliances, and later Income Tax Department sends notices for recovering that particular money that as a demand from the buyer. So I'm going to talk about when you buy property from the NRI, because the compliances are little stringent here. So this particular section 195 of Income Tax Act talks about it, that every buyer who is buying property from a NRI seller has to deduct 20% plus 10% plus 4%, total 22.88% tax from the total sales consideration. So again, this is a very high amount. So if somebody is buying property for 50 lakh or more than 50 lakh, he has to deduct 22.88% tax from the total sales consideration, and he has to apply for a TAN, and he has to do all the TDS compliance, fulfill all the TDS compliances, like pay the challan of the amount deducted, and then file the return, and then download Form 16A and give it to the seller, so that he can claim the TDS credit when he files the return in the subsequent year. So the biggest problem here is that if you do not do this, the income tax departments will come after you and try to recover the entire money from the buyer. So it is very important that you focus on this particular section. And even in case of resident Indian, so there is one thing in resident Indian seller case, the property value should be more than 50 lakh to deduct the TDS. But in case of NRI, there is no capping has been given. So even if the property value is 10 lakh or 20 lakh or whatever, you have to deduct the TDS and pay it to the government.
Right. So I have a question here, Akash. Supposing you apply for a TAN number, then what do you do with this new number which you have obtained from the government? Do you need to go and surrender the TAN number, the tax deduction number?
Yes. So TAN number stands for tax deduction account number. And since a buyer is not going to be very regular in filing the TDS return, it's a one-time activity for the buyer, and he has to obtain the TAN fulfill the TDS compliances like filing the return, downloading the Form 16A and everything, and then he has to surrender the 10 because he cannot use it again for any other activity.
Okay. So the 1% becomes 22% for in case we buy the property from a NRI.
Right.
That's
So
much of a difference.
yeah, it's very high, but there is a provision in income tax that if seller goes to the seller try to obtain a lower tax deduction certificate from the income tax authority and provide it to the buyer, then buyer can deduct the tax at a lower rate as mentioned in the certificate by the income tax officer.
Okay, so that should be helpful for, so they have to plan maybe a 30-day in advance for the entire process to start.
Yeah, 30 to 60 day in advance they should plan in advance, and seller should hire a practicing CA who can assist the seller in obtaining the lower tax deduction certificate from the income tax officer.
Right. In Karnataka, this process is online. So I've seen compared to other states, now it's much less tedious to apply, for a lower tax deduction certificate in Karnataka,
Yes.
Bombay. There are only 2-3 locations where this process is online as on date.
Yes, but still, it is always recommended to take some margin of safety in terms of days. So I still recommend take a 30 to 60 days advance time in applying with the income tax officer for a lower tax deduction certificate, whether online or offline.
Right. So Nisha is asking if the property is brought from resident seller, can the TDS process be taken care with a PAN? I think it's yes. Yes.
Yeah. So if you are buying property from a resident seller, in that case, you do not need to apply for a tax deduction account number. You can fulfill all the compliances using seller and buyer's PAN. Okay. So this is all about TDS compliances, and I really wanted to put some emphasis on this particular section because this is very important. One of my client had bought a property worth rupees 60 lakh, and he did not do the DDS compliances, and he did not deduct the money and did not pay it to the government and did not file the TDS return. Later, after 30 days, he got a notice from income tax department about with the demand notice to pay the entire 12 lakh rupees from his own pocket. So seller is not responsible in this particular section. Buyer will be held responsible for any non-compliance, even if seller pays the entire tax to the government after the end of the year. So buyer will still be held responsible to do everything, and if he doesn't do, he will get into penalty things.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so we go to the next topic, which is taxability on redemption of mutual fund. So we see that people are investing in mutual fund nowadays. Like they have a tendency in investing in mutual fund, and people invest and sell the mutual fund. So when we buy the mutual fund, we do not know what happens if we sell it. So there is a taxability imposed on the redemption. If you are making any profit on sale of mutual fund, then you have to show those profits in your income tax return. And how those profit will get taxable, we're going to talk about that here. So to understand this entire taxability on the redemption of mutual fund, we need to understand two important questions, like what kind of mutual fund we have invested in, the nature of mutual fund. So by nature, I meant whether it's an equity-oriented mutual fund or a debt-oriented mutual fund or a hybrid mutual fund. So actually, there are only two mutual funds, with one is equity and debt. So hybrid is nothing, is a mix of both. So when we talk about taxability runs around equity and debt. So we have to understand what is a hybrid mutual fund and in which category it will come when we talk about taxation. So equity-oriented mutual fund means the fund is investing 100% of its investment in the equity shares or equity stock. And debt-oriented fund means simply as it named, debt. So the asset management company or the mutual fund company investing the collection in the debt instruments. hybrid means the company or the mutual fund company is investing in both equity and debt. But in taxation, we have to understand that how much is the equity portion and how much is the debt portion. So if the equity portion is more than 65%, then it will be considered as equity oriented mutual fund. But if the
But Akash, it is so difficult to find out now, which is so. Are we supposed to look at the exposure of the fund house, whether they have invested in which all stocks? That's a very detailed activity for a SSC, right? So how do we identify quickly whether it's an equity or a debt fund from a taxation perspective?
Yeah. So when we invest in any mutual fund, the mutual fund company gives us the detail of that mutual fund, that what kind of exposure they are, taking off. So it is already mentioned in the policy or the mutual fund documents that this is an equity fund or a debt fund or a hybrid fund. And if it is a hybrid fund, the mutual fund company clearly specifies that how much portion is going to be invested in equity stock and how much in the debt instruments. So if we read those documents clearly, we'll understand that what kind of fund it is.
Okay, but investors sign on the dotted line. Is there a number by which we can just check from CAMS, Karvi, whether it's a debt and an equity fund?
I'm sorry, I did not understand. Can you repeat again?
I'm saying because most of the investors, they generally don't understand in detail, when they are investing. It's more on, market information that we go ahead and invest somewhere. So can CAMS, Karvi or any kind of a wealth manager give us this information upfront?
Yes. So wealth manager can definitely give you the 100% information about that particular fund, or you can definitely go to your distributor and talk to him and understand what kind of fund it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a very important question, that you need to understand what kind of fund you have invested in, and then we will talk about the holding period. So then we'll talk about the holding period. So I'm sorry, I'll continue on the hybrid fund. So when the equity portion in a hybrid fund or a balanced fund is more than 65%, then it will be considered as equity oriented fund for the taxation purpose. And if the equity portion is less than 65%, then it will be considered as debt oriented fund. So this is the first particular thing which we need to understand clearly for the taxation point of view. So we'll come back to the taxation, but we need to understand what kind of fund it is and what kind of the holding period. So by holding period, I mean is like it is defined separately for equity and debt funds. So I'll come to the next slide and talk about it. So when we are talking about equity fund, if we are investing in equity fund for less than 12 months, it will be considered as short-term investment. And if we are investing in equity fund for long-term, we have to invest for more than 12 months. So any investment which is more than 12 months in equity oriented fund will be considered as long-term investment. For debt fund, the timeline defined is 36 months. So if we are investing in debt fund is less than 36 months, it will be considered as short-term. And if we invest for more than 36 months, it will be considered as long-term. And hybrid fund will have the same definition. First, we have to understand whether hybrid fund is an equity fund or a debt fund. And the short-term and long-term definition will be applied accordingly. Now come to the taxability of the mutual fund. So now when we have understood whether it's equity fund or debt fund, whether it's a long-term investment or a short-term investment, we can understand the taxability very easily. So if it is an equity fund in which we have invested and we have sold that fund in less than 12 months, then the profit made on that fund will be taxed at 15% flat. And if it is equity fund, which is invested for more than 12 months and then we have redeemed it, then it will be exempt up to 1 lakh. And post 1 lakh profit, it will be taxed at 10%. So it is simple that if you invest for a longer period, you will be taxed at a lesser rate in equity oriented fund. When we talk about the debt fund, if it is a short-term fund, means if you have invested and redeemed it in less than 36 months, the profit will be taxed at the normal slab rate. It will be added to your regular income and will be taxed at the regular slab, like 2.5 lakh to 5 lakh, 5 lakh to 10 lakh, 10 lakh and above. But if it is invested for more than 36 months and redeem after 36 months, it will be taxed at 20%. Yeah.
So just to remind, we have only 15 minutes to wrap up the session.
Yeah. So I think this is our this was our last topic. We can start with the Q&A here.
Okay. So I have two very important questions received at the time of registration. So people are questioning, like, we are not sure going forward whether we will get the same salaries from the company. So many companies like have announced a 30% or a 20% reduction in salaries. However, the TDS has got deducted and this started in the month of April itself. So employees are curious to know, is there a way wherein they can postpone the TDS deduction to future months? So that once they have more certainty in terms of the total income that they will earn in the year, the TDS can be proportionately deducted. Can any one of you, answer their query, because this is bothering many of the participants also here?
Yeah, my view is that if you talk about the taxation rate of for the salary, if salary is taxed on an accrual basis, which essentially means that even though the salary is not paid, we have to deduct tax, or the employer has to deduct tax. But as per circular on the CBDT, there is an option given to the employer that at the time of final deduction at the end of the year, they can increase and reduce the amount and kind of finally take care of the differential which is there at the end of the year. And initially, when there is a probability, or when is the outlook that the tax will not be on the second part of the on the second half or later on, so they can go for or reduce it. That will kind of give a lot of breathability to the employees in terms of lower tax, and which kind of, otherwise what happens is that they will get this money, but they have to file the return and claim TDS. So employer can take that request and kind of reduce the TDS amount, so that finally once evaluating after the end of the year, or they can go for the differential amount and kind of deduct the amount.
But
Yeah.
There might be interest and penalties if they do, if they do the tax deduction in this particular manner. Is there anything more specific that the employees can tell the employers? Because
no, there is no specific provision of extra interest or penalty on the employee side, because at times it might happen, people get an increment in the second half, or some kind of bonus amount is announced and they get there. So the employer has to deduct tax at whatever the differential which is there. And initially, if they deduct a higher amount and later on the second half or whatever, the employee is not there, so at the full year basis, you find that there is nil tax which has to pay, and ultimately there is a lot of tax which is deducted. So it will kind of impact in terms of cash flow for those employees. So employer can go ahead and and kind of initially accept those requests.
okay, so employer can defer the tax payment basically on account of these employees. So that
Exactly.
maybe the employer can also look at it in a more positive and an emotional manner. So Saurabh Chopra has a very interesting query. Is there some kind of home office tax exemption which is available? I think this hasn't come to the attention of Mr. Modi. So do you have any update on this?
No, there is what I essentially understand it, in case somebody is working from home, is there any kind of additional tax rebate which is available? Am I correct?
Sorry?
No, there is no exemption in this.
Yeah, there is no particular notification has come in this particular area. I have also written one article on LinkedIn, that government should provide some kind of exemption or deduction when the employees are working from home.
Right, which is so very realistic.
Yeah.
Right. And Saurav has another question. As a first-time investor with risk of 0%, what kind of mutual fund you can recommend?
I
Is
think
there
I
any?
can answer this. Okay, you answer this. You answer this.
No, no, Akash, you please go ahead.
So I can recommend him to invest in start from liquid funds where the risk is negligible or is not there, and the return comes around 6% or somewhere, and you have easy option to liquidate it whenever you want.
Okay. There is one more question which we have missed out answering. Somebody has a question on donation. One second. So before that, we have received one more question. Somebody is resigning in the month of September, and incidentally, the company has declared a 50% pay cut across all employees. So he is worried whether his long-term benefit, the gratuity which he is entitled to get, will also be 50% of what is expected. Like, it's quite a serious and a very tricky situation. But then, how can this situation be, addressed? Anyone, like, you have any thoughts on this?
What I understand, there will be two impact. First, in case somebody is resigning from September, and in case it doesn't have an income on the from October to March, and whenever employee is deducting salary, they are basically assuming the salary for the whole year and deduct tax. So they might be left with a higher TDS amount. And secondly, in terms of the benefit, which is kind of retirement benefit like gratuity, as you told, have a the amount which will be payable will be at a lower rate, because whenever we calculate gratuities, it is calculated basis 15 days of salary per year based on the last salary drawn. So in case of last salary drawn, it's a lower amount. Finally, the employee will get a lower amount basis this calculation. So
Is Sujit locked out? Akash, would you want to answer this question? Oh, he is joining back.
Sujit, are you there?
No.
Okay, Nidhi, can you repeat the question once?
So the question is, somebody is actually either retiring or resigning, say in September 2020. So he is entitled to a gratuity from the company because he has served more than 5 years.
Right.
In this scenario, the company also has announced a 50% pay cut across all employees. So how will his gratuity be given to him? Is it at 100% salary or is it at a 50% salary? Because gratuity mandates that the last drawn salary, which is important for the purpose of calculation.
Yeah, last 10 months basic salary. Sujit, do you want to continue?
Yes.
Back?
Yeah. So basically, there is an option, where salary. Whenever we calculate gratuity, also.
Right. So Akash, you can go ahead, no problem. Because we are running out of time, only 6 minutes.
Yeah. So I think gratuity will be calculated on the basis of last drawn. But there is a provision in Income Tax Act that they take the average of last month's salary, last 10 months salary. So they do not just pick up the last drawn salary, but they take the average to calculate the exemption limit also.
Right. Plus, what I have seen, many of the salary slip shows that this is your gross pay, and they show the COVID-19 deductions as a different line item, which means what is accrued to me is say a lakh of rupees, but what hits my bank account is only 50,000 because of these deductions. I think that also is a good way to handle this situation.
Yes. I think that's the right way to handle this deduction situation in the pandemic scenario.
Right, because that impacts various eligibilities for loans and other reasons. Maybe after 2 years, when you start traveling, maybe for visa eligibility, they will look at the gross pay only. They should not look at the net pay. So Mr. Shaktivel has a question. What happened new tax about APC and APD? In the new tax regime, we don't get the benefit of APC or APD. That's his question.
So in the new tax regime, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in the new tax regime, we cannot claim the deduction under Section 80C.
Right. And Mr. Shaktivel wants to know what was your suggestion on new tax, or can employee follow old one?
Yeah, so that you have to calculate that what kind of benefits you can get if you adopt for the new tax regime. So I think that's something uh, you need to calculate and take the differentiation between like what kind of which regime is giving you the better benefit in terms of tax savings.
Okay, few more questions. I will not cite the name quickly. In which financial year do we have to pay tax on mutual fund profit? The one in which we invest, or the one in which we redeem the mutual fund?
In the year in which we redeem the mutual fund.
Right. So there was an amendment now, 31st of January 2018, wherein the liability was seized on various long-term capital gains. That was a very unique scenario, financial year 18-19. But from 1920 onwards, we pay in the year in which we redeem, right?
Yes.
And the valuation is this. So another one, I received a 10 lakh bonus in my first salary, but because I will resign very soon, due to which I will have to return it to company, where does this transaction get captured? Is it in payslip or self-declared?
I think this should come in the full and final statement of the employee.
Right.
Right.
Any thoughts on it? Any thoughts on this? Oh, Sujit is logged out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it should come in the full and final statement of the employee, where they can clearly mention that what is what company owes to the employees and what owns from the employee. So they can do the net calculation and show in the full and final statement.
Right. Akash, one important thing which many of our investors may be interested to know about the dividend tax. So there has been frequent changes. What is the status of the current taxation on dividends?
Hello.
Sujit, would you like to take it up? What is the current dividend taxation?
Taxation on dividend, right? Yeah, from the current financial year, that is, from 1st April 2020, what happened is that, that the company don't have to pay dividend tax, and as a result, whatever, for example, individual gets the dividend, he has to add to his income from other sources and pay tax as per slab rate which is coming. And for anything which is prior to this, or say last financial year, basically dividend tax has to be paid by the company. And in case of a SSC, which is anything beyond 10 lakh, will be taxable, and anything which is below 10 lakh, the amount was exempt. So for current year, it will be just added as income from other sources for the entire amount.
Okay. And in your presentation, you have spoken about certain disclosures in the income tax return. One is you have coined a term called HNI. Does income tax have a definition of HNI?
No, income tax as such doesn't have a concept of HNI. It's basically, when you have a certain, because the entire taxation is a slab based, once you cross that limit, the impact of this additional surcharge will come when you crosses that 50 lakhs of limit, and additional disclosure like your asset liability statement will come in, and which one has to kind of comply with.
Right. But we have noted, like in my experience also, especially in Karnataka, people don't maintain their books of accounts. So how do we make sure that we give accurate information for disclosure purposes in the ITR? We
For
don't
this
make accounts as
HNI,
such.
for this HNI.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, books of account is obviously not maintained, but they can, for example, they will have a house just to give a few examples, they will have a house, so they will have a purchase agreement basis that they can derive the amount of payment or amount of investment in that immovable property is done, so they can derive number from them. Similarly, for car, they will have some amount of invoice which they're coming in, so they have to kind of record that on a spreadsheet or whatever, and arrive at the amount which is there. Similarly, in case of share
Right.
fund, the amount of investment which is done, they have to track it. Although they are not compulsory to maintain books of account for them, but they have to maintain some kind of net worth statement which is there.
Okay. So there are few more questions in the chat box. Maybe we can reply to them, separately. We are running out of time. So may I just conclude the session? Thank you very much. Thank you, Sujit, Akash, for answering all these queries very patiently. I have personally enjoyed the session, very informative, and we have a lot of thank you messages in the chat box. So I'm sure our participants have enjoyed. We have also tried to make it, very interactive so that you understand the concept in more detail. It's very important that the returns that we file today are very accurate. One small mismatch in information, kind of trigger a defective notice from the department. So all the best. I think we are heading towards the return filing season. So any other queries, we would be happy to send, receive your questions and answer them as promptly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everyone. You can still put
Right.
your questions on support@optimoney.com, and we'll try to answer the questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.